Good afternoon. Today we'll be talking about John Keats on first looking into Chapman's Homer. Now, as I've already told you before, John Keats was very much mesmerized by Greek literature. Although he could not read Greek, but he was mystified by that element of mystery and enchantment that Greek literature, and in fact, any object related to the Greek history and arts that produced in him. We have already talked about some of his poems, notably the Ode to a Grecian Urn, in which he celebrates the mystery of life after death and the immortality that the arts give the artist and the portrayed. Now, in this poem, we have sort of a perspective offered by Keats on Greek literature and the magical mystery that it holds and propounds. Now, he could not read Greek, and the very first, you can say, glimpse of Greek literature was offered to him by Chapman's translation of Homer, and it was given to him by his friend, and they both read the book through the night. And Keats was so mesmerized by the whole experience that in the morning he wrote this wonderful sonnet. So, on first looking into Chapman's Homer, it is a sonnet, and it is a classical work in terms of romantic poetry, as it gives us not only a glimpse into the power of imagination that Keats propounded, but it also gives us that sort of attachment that the romantics they had towards the ancient writers. So, as I told you, the inspiration was for the poem was a translation of Homer by Chapman, and it was given to Keats by Charles Cowden Clarke. It was a he was a friend of Keats from his school days, and they both read it through the night till the morning. And in the morning, Keats wrote this wonderful sonnet, and it was first published in the journal The Examiner on 1st December 1816. Now, in terms of style, the poem is a Petrarca sonnet, and it is divided into an octave and a sestet. Now, this is something that is very typical and remarkable of English sonneteers. If you remember your Shakespeare, we know that he divided his sonnets into 12, and the last couplet used to wrap up the idea that was promoted in the earlier 12 lines. And Keats, in following the style of the Italian sonnet, what he does is he divides his sonnet into an octave and a sestet. And with a rhyme scheme, as you know, ABBA, we'll also see this rhyme scheme when we read the poem. It is ABBA, ABBA, and then the final three couplets CDC, CDC, DCD. So, and because as typical of the English sonnets, the sonnet is written in iambic pentameter. So, what you have here is you have an octave, and then you have three heroic couplets. And as I was telling you, as we have the reversal of ideas, the conclusion of the entire poem, the entire sonnet in Shakespeare, and so we have the wrapping up of thought in the final sestet in Keats, and this is also called as a volta. A volta is basically a change in the train of thought, and while Octave offers the poet as a literary explorer who first sees the advent of Greek literature as an explorer, a sailor who would first see land after a long voyage. The Volta here, it brings Keats to the center of the epiphany of having being introduced to Greek literature. And obviously, we have lots of imagery and comparisons in the poem, and it is obviously a characteristic of romantic poetry to have plenty of imagery at the disposal of the poet. I would like to talk about the volta again. It is basically, a volta is a change in the train of thought. जैसे शेक्सपियर के सॉनेट्स में था, फर्स्ट 12 लाइन्स में ही यूज्ड टू डेवलप एन आइडिया एंड इन द कपलेट ही यूज्ड टू summarize it. Same is in the Italian sonnet. Here we have Keats talking about the his introduction to Greek literature in the first 8 lines, and the magic that he has now discovered in the last 6 lines. So now let us begin with the poem. So now Keats, as any poet in the Romantic period, he was very much influenced by the earlier poetry. And so he says that much have I travelled in the realms of gold and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. He says that obviously I have read a lot of literature and I have read a lot of poetry and I'm a big fan of poetry, and I have seen many kingdoms. I have seen many goodly states, means I have seen many great poets in my lifetime. Around many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Now, Apollo was a Greek god, and he says that I have been around many islands, I have been around many places where I have seen poets which are as good as intelligent as bright as the Greek gods themselves. So the poet says that I have already read much poetry written by great poets. And obviously, we know the romantic, unlike the neoclassical poets who did not consider the ancients or the classic poets to be good at all, the romantic poets, they really respected and they really, they revered the classical ancient poets. तो किस वही कहता है कि मैंने बहुत सारे अच्छे पोएट्स अभी तक देखे भी हैं, बहुत सारे पोएट्स पढ़े हैं, सम ऑफ विच आर इक्वलेंट टू ग्रीक गॉड्स इन टर्म्स ऑफ देयर ब्यूटी of their poetry. But oft of one wide expanse had I been told. Now he says that I had been told many times of the beauty of Greek literature, but I had never, ventured to explore it. That deep-browed Homer ruled as his demons, as his kingdom. He says that I had been told previously many times about the beauty of Greek literature, but I had never had the good fortune to read it ever. वो कहता है कि मुझे उस किंगडम के बारे में बहुत पहले से बताया गया था, जिसका रूलर कौन था? Homer. Means I had been told many times about the Greek poets, and of which Homer is the greatest. Yet I did never breathe its pure serene till I heard Chapman speak out loud, and behold. He said I had never yet seen Greek literature in all its glory until a volume of Chapman's poetry was handed to me. जब तक Chapman की poetry मैंने नहीं पढ़ी थी, जब तक Chapman की translation मैंने नहीं पढ़ी थी, I never knew the true beauty of Homer and Greek literature. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken. Now, the Romantic Age, it was a period of very historical, significance, as Uranus was discovered in 1781 by William Herschel, and he was court astronomer to George III. So Keats mentions that, references to that event. He says, when I discovered Greek literature, I felt like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his vision. He says, I felt that joy as if I had found a new planet when I read Greek literature for the first time through the translation of Chapman. Or like the stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. Now, Cortez here is a reference to the Spanish conqueror, and he led an expedition that caused the fall of the Aztec Empire and brought large portion of what is now mainland Mexico under the rule of the King of Castile in the early 16th century. He was basically, Cortez was the explorer who extended the Spanish Empire down to the Panama and the Mexican Empire. He's an explorer, Cortez. So he says, when I saw, the Greek literature emerge through the translation of Chapman, I felt as overjoyed as Cortez, who With his eyes, he first stared at the Pacific, and they approached the peak of Darien. Darien is a province in Panama. So he says when he sailed towards Panama and when he first saw the peak of Darien, the joy which he must have felt, I felt the equivalent joy. वो कह रहा है जब सबसे पहली बार जो स्पेनिश एक्सप्लोरर है कॉर्टेस, जब वो अपनी शिप लेके निकला होगा और सबसे पहली बार पनामा जो है कनाल उसके आर पार जब उसने देखा और पहली बार जब उसको पीक दिखी ऑफ डेरियन, तो जो खुशी उसको मिली होगी वो लैंड देख के इतने साल ट्रैवल करने के बाद, वही सेम खुशी मुझे मिली व्हेन आई फर्स्ट रेड चैपमैन्स होमर. So, what is basically the crux of the poem? In the first 8 lines, in the first octave, Keats says that I had previously read many good poems, but and I had been told about the beauty that lied in Greek literature, but I had never had the good fortune of ever reading any of it until I read Chapman's Homer. And then he felt like as if a new planet yet to be explored had opened up in front of his eyes, or he felt like an explorer coming upon a new land, discovering a new land, discovering a new civilization. So, this is all about on first looking into Chapman's Homer. We'll discuss it further also. So, basically, क्या है इस poem में? That Keats first read the translation of Homer by Chapman, and he was so overjoyed that he felt as if an entirely new universe had been opened up to him.